So let me describe a performance review that you've probably had. So your manager opens by saying something genuinely positive. They mention a specific project. They say your name and a good outcome in the same sentence. You feel seen finally for a moment. Then they shift to areas for development. You take notes carefully, you nod, you make a mental commitment to work on the things they mentioned. Then it ends. Welcome to the Drew Chaz Podcast, the podcast built for introverts with big goals and busy minds. I'm your host, Drew, and around here, we don't silence our thoughts, we sharpen them. Every week, I give you the mindset frameworks, clarity formulas, and quiet power strategies that help deep thinkers move forward. If you're ready to turn overthinking into clarity, turn hesitation into action, and build success your way, you're in the right place. So let's get into it. You walk out, you write yourself a reminder to follow up on one of the feedback points. And 2 weeks later, you're sitting at your desk wondering why that conversation, the one that was supposed to matter, didn't seem to move anything. Well, let me tell you why. The review was about your manager's observations. It was their summary of what they noticed, what they remembered, and how they processed your year through the filter of everything else that they're managing. It was not about your actual contributions. It was about the version of your contributions that made it into your manager's mental summary. Well, today we're going to close that gap permanently. For most corporate introverts, those two things, your actual contribution and your manager's mental summary, are totally different. And the gap between them is where promotions just get lost, raises get delayed, and careers stall out, despite genuinely excellent work. Can you relate to that? So, welcome to the Drew Chaz Podcast. I'm Drew, and this is a great episode because we're continuing to build a complete quiet authority system. Last episode, we talked about the raise conversation, specifically how to build your evidence, anchor the number, and deliver the ask. But today's episode is deeply connected to that one because the performance review is often the door through which the raise conversation walks. If your review doesn't accurately reflect what you've done, the raise conversation starts from a weaker position. Think about it. If your review does accurately reflect it, if your manager walks into that review already holding a clear picture of your full value, then the raise conversation is almost a formality. And that is what today is about. Not how to survive your performance review, but how to own it. And I want to be honest about something before we go further. Most of the advice out there about performance reviews is focused on the meeting itself. What to say when you're in the room, how to handle difficult feedback, how to ask for promotion at the end. All of that is useful, but it's all downstream. Well, today, this is what you're going to walk away with. First, a clear understanding of why corporate introverts consistently undersell themselves in performance reviews, including the specific cognitive habit that makes it almost inevitable without a system to counteract it. Second, the performance narrative system, a three-part approach to documenting, framing, and presenting your contributions that shift you from being evaluated to presenting. And that gives your manager the exact narrative they need to advocate for you when you're not in the room. So third, 4 specific phrases that transform the dynamic of the review meeting from reactive to strategic, and phrases you can memorize and adapt to your own voice. And fourth, something that doesn't get talked about enough: how to manage upward effectively in the 90 days before your review so that the meeting is in the final chapter of a story your manager has already been reading, not a surprise reveal. So let me walk you through what underselling actually looks like in a performance review, because it's almost never obvious in the moment. It doesn't feel like underselling. It feels like actually humility, right? The performance review is won or lost in the months before you ever sit down at that table. The meeting is a presentation, and presentations are only as good as the preparation behind them, right? Today, we'll build a preparation and we start it right now, not the week before your next review. So here's the scene. Your manager asks, "What are you most proud of from this past year?" And the introvert who undersells gives an answer that sounds like this: "I think the Q3 launch went well. I was really happy with how the team came together. And I worked on some process improvements that I think helped things run more smoothly." Well, that answer isn't wrong, but it's doing almost none of the work it could be doing. Listen, here we go. The Q3 launch went well. What does that mean? What was your specific role? What would have been different without your contribution? I worked on some process improvements. Well, which ones? What did they produce? What problem did they solve, and how long had that problem been there before you addressed it? The introvert who undersells describes what happened. The high performer describes what they made happen and what it meant. Bragging is talking about how great you are, but professional communication is talking about what you delivered and what it produced. And the first is self promotion. The second is business reporting, and the performance review is a business conversation, not a humility performance. Let me show you what the same answer sounds like when it's delivered with professional specificity. Okay, here we go. The Q3 launch was a significant project for me. I led the cross functional coordination between product, marketing, and operations, a role that wasn't formally assigned to anyone but was critical to keep the three timelines aligned. When we hit the supply chain issue in week 6, I built a contingency plan that the executive team approved, and we launched 7 days early compared to the original timeline. That was a first for this product line. So that's the same person, same experience, completely different impression. And the specificity comes from a system, not from trying to remember everything in the moment. So before we get into the performance narrative system, I want to spend a moment explaining why your manager's mental summary of your year is almost always incomplete and why it's not really their fault. Because your manager is responsible for what, somewhere between 4 and 15 people, depending on the organization, of course. And they're also responsible for their own deliverables and their own relationships with their manager, budget conversations, headcount decisions, cross functional coordination, and about 40 other things that have nothing to do with you. They see you in meetings, they receive your outputs, they get your emails, but they don't have visibility into the full texture of what you did, the problems you saw before they became visible, the relationships you built across the organization, the late hours on the thing nobody tracked, the decision you made in the moment that prevented something from falling apart. That texture is invisible to them unless you bring it to the surface. And this is the uncomfortable part of this. The consistent visibility is what the performance narrative system creates. Not once a year in a review meeting, but all year long, quietly, in a way that builds the narrative before anyone ever sits down at the table. The performance narrative system has 3 parts: the contribution log, the frame, and the opening statement. Let me take you through each one in real depth. So, part 1 is the contribution log. The contribution log is the foundation of everything else. It's a living document, not a list you build the night before you review, but something you update weekly throughout the year. You've heard this before. The structure is simple: one entry per significant contributions. Each entry has 3 fields: what you did, what it produced, and who it affected. So, what you did. This is the action. Be specific about your individual role, not just what the team did. Not, we launched the new client portal. I designed the user testing protocol for the client portal launch and ran 6 rounds of testing with 12 participants that caught 3 critical UX issues before we go live. What it produced, and this is the outcome. Numbers are best, but not all outcomes are numerical. Time saved, problems prevented, relationships built, processes improved, revenue influenced, cost reduced. Risks mitigated. Think in terms of what would have been different without your contribution. Who it affected? This is the stakeholder map. You direct team. This is the stakeholder map, your direct team. Cross functional partners, leadership clients, the broader organization. When you name who was affected, you're making a case for the scope and organizational significance of your work. Now, let me tell you why the weekly update matters so much. Because the colleagues who advance fastest in corporate environments are not always the ones who do the most work. They're the ones who do excellent work and make sure the right people have an accurate picture of that work. Not through bragging, but through consistent professional visibility. Research shows that we overweight recent events and underweight things that happened more than 3 months ago. If you build your contribution log the week before you review, you will remember about 40% of what you actually did. You will remember the big things from Q4, some things from Q3, and almost nothing from Q1 and Q2. But Q1 might be where your best work happened, and Q2 might be where you solved the problem nobody else could. And if it's not in the document, it will be in the review. The weekly update changes this completely. You spend 5 minutes every Friday writing one entry about the most significant contribution of your week. And by the time your review comes around, whether that's in 2 months or 9 months, you have a complete, accurate, specific record of your full year. And you're not trying to remember, you're selecting the strongest entries to present. Okay, let's talk about the frame. The frame is the difference between presenting facts and presenting narratives, and that difference is enormous. Because facts describe what happened, narratives describe what happened and what it meant. In a performance review, your manager doesn't just need to know what you did, they need to understand the significance of what you did. In language they can repeat to their manager when advocating for your advancement. So let me show you the transformation in detail. So, fact version. I manage the vendor relationship with our main software provider. But this is the narrative version. I rebuilt the vendor relationship with our main software provider and it deteriorated under the previous structure. Over 8 months, I negotiated the service terms, established a monthly executive review cadence, and resolved the 3 outstanding support escalations that have been open for over a year. And we're now in the strongest position with that vendor we have been in since the contract was signed. So that fact was accurate. The narrative is the same fact with context, timeline, specificity, and outcome attached. Do you get this? Notice what happens when you read the narrative version. You automatically understand the scale of the work. You understand that it was a recovery situation, not a maintenance situation. And you also understand that it required sustained effort over 8 months. You understand what good looks like now compared to before. Well, your manager can't repeat the fact version to their manager in a way that advocates for your advancement. The fact version sounds like you did your job. The narrative system, though, it sounds like you did something that required real skill, real relationships, and real strategic thinking. The contribution log is not just a tool for performance reviews, it's your running case for your own career advancement. Every raise conversation, every promotion discussion, every job application in the future draws from this document. And it's the most valuable 15 minutes you can spend on your career. 5 minutes every Friday, 52 weeks a year. That's it. For every entry in your contribution log, ask yourself one question. If my manager had to explain this contribution to their manager in 30 seconds, do they have enough to make it sound significant? Well, if the answer is no, your frame is not complete. So we get to the opening statement. Well, most introverts walk into the performance reviews and wait. They wait for their manager to open the conversation. They wait for the question. They wait for the space to speak. And in that waiting, they hand over something incredibly valued, the narrative frame. Whoever opens a performance review sets the context for everything that follows. When your manager opens, they set the context through the lens of their observations, their priorities, and their mental summary, which, as we discussed, is just incomplete. But when you open, you set the context through the lens of your best work, your most significant contributions, and the story you want told. The opening statement is a single sentence, or two at most. And the opening statement is what you deliver before your manager sets the agenda. It sounds something like this. Before we get into your feedback, I'd like to take a few minutes to share some things I'm really particularly proud of this year and how I see my contribution to the team's outcomes. That sentence does four things simultaneously. It signals that you came prepared. It positions you as someone who has thought strategically about their own performance. And it requests a few minutes of protected time before the feedback begins. And it reframes the conversation from an evaluation into a presentation. Your manager will almost always say yes because the request is reasonable and professional. And in that moment, the meeting has shifted. You're no longer the subject of the review, you're the co author of it. And after you deliver the opening statement, you walk through your three strongest contribution log entries with full frames attached. Three, not 10, three entries, each one specific, outcome connected, and told in a narrative form. You take approximately 2 to 3 minutes per entry, and by the time your manager begins their feedback, they've already been listening to 6 to 9 minutes presentation of your strongest work in your words, with your emphasis, building your narrative. Their feedback will land in a very different context than if you had simply waited for them to open. Look, this isn't manipulation. This is strategic communication. And you're giving your manager the most accurate, complete, compelling picture of your contributions, which is exactly what they need to accurately assess your performance and advocate for your advancement. Listen, you're making their job easier and you're making your case at the same time. So I want to add one more concept that ties everything together, and that's the 90-day visibility window. The 90 days before your performance review are the most leverageable time in your professional year. This is when you have the opportunity to make sure your manager is going into that meeting already holding the narrative you want them to hold. And here's how to use those 90 days intentionally. First, first, increase the frequency of meaningful touch points with your manager, not shallow check ins, targeted, substantive moments where you share what you're working on, what you've delivered, and where you're adding value. One extra touch point per week for 90 days is all it takes. Second, start narrating your work in real time. When you solve a problem, send a one paragraph email to your manager summarizing what happened, what you did, and what the outcome was. Not a long report, just one high level paragraph with a subject line, quick update on whatever the project is. This builds your manager's mental summary while the contribution is fresh. And third, make sure you're visible to your manager's manager during this window. Not in a forced or political way, but if there are opportunities to present in a broader meeting, to be included in a cross functional discussion, or to contribute to something with leadership visibility, take those opportunities deliberately in the 90 days before you review. Look, I know it's difficult. I know it'll raise your blood pressure and to get you nervous and you get kind of freaked out, but it's worth it. It's worth your future. And when your manager walks into the review conversation, having received real time updates about your work for the past 3 months, having seen you in context beyond your immediate team, and having heard you present your thinking to people above them, their mental summary is already accurate. You're not correcting their incomplete picture in the meeting. You're confirming the complete picture you've already started. So this week, I'll give you a quick win challenge. Open a document and build your first 5 contribution log entries. Go back through the last 3 months. Find 5 significant contributions. Things you did that went beyond your basic job description, that produced a real outcome, that affected real people. Write all 3 fields for each one: what you did, what it produced, who it affected. And don't filter or minimize, just write. That document is the foundation of your next review, your next raise conversation, and your next promotion discussion. And it's midway through the year, so it'll set you up perfectly for the end of year reviews. I need to stop here for a moment because this episode is one of those core reasons that I built the promotion playbook jumpstart. The performance narrative system, the contribution log structure, the framing methodology, the 90-day visibility window, all of it is built out in full detail inside the promotion playbook jumpstart. Not just the concepts, the templates, the specific language, and the worked examples. Because knowing the framework is one thing, but having the exact tools to implement, it's another. The promotion playbook jumpstart is a complete step-by-step system for corporate introverts who are done doing excellent work, but being invisible while louder, less careful colleagues get the advancement and the compensation. So, in summary, let me bring the 3 parts of the performance narrative system together before we close. The contribution log is your year round investment in your own career. 5 minutes every Friday, 3 fields per entry. By review time, you have a complete, accurate record of your full year that you're selecting from, not scrambling to reconstruct from memory. The frame converts facts into narratives. Every entry in your log needs to answer the question: if my manager had 30 seconds to explain this contribution to their manager, do they have enough to make it sound significant? If not, the frame is not complete. And then the opening statement shifts the review from an evaluation to a presentation. And you open it. You set the context. You walk through your 3 strongest entries. And your manager's feedback lands in the context of your best work, not the other way around. And the 90-day visibility window means you're not building the narrative in the meeting, you're confirming it. The performance review is won long before you sit down at that table. So get started today. So, this is what we learned. The gap between your actual contributions and your manager's mental summary of them is where careers basically stall. And that gap is closable with the right system. Underselling in reviews is not humility, it is an absence of professional specificity that can be corrected. The contribution log turns your invisible work into documented, specific, outcome connected evidence. Build it weekly, not the night before. The frame converts facts into narratives that your manager can repeat when advocating for your advancement. And that opening statement shifts you from being evaluated to presenting. Open the review, set the frame, walk through your 3 strongest entries. So the 90-day visibility window means the meeting is a confirmation, not a revelation. So let's conclude this lesson. Listen, your work is excellent. I genuinely believe that, not as a platitude, but because the kind of person who listens to a podcast like this, who thinks carefully about how to communicate their value, who is willing to build a system around their own career, that's someone who does good work and takes it seriously. The problem has never been the quality of your work. The problem has been the gap between the quality of your work and the completeness of the narrative around it. Today, you now have the system to close that gap. Listen, if this episode helped you see yourself more clearly, please follow or subscribe to the Drew Chaz podcast. Leaving a review helps other introverts just find my show, and sharing this episode helps someone else feel less alone in their thinking. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. And remember, your analytical mind is not holding you back. It's your greatest asset when you know how to use it. So until next time, keep thinking deeply, keep moving forward, and most of all, you be you.